All right. Well, hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this latest session of the Okra Lunch and Learn series. And we are so thrilled to have you here today. My name is Sarah Ivy, and I work for the Oklahoma Department of Environmental Quality, but I am on the Okra board, and I am the education chair. So we're the group responsible for putting on these lunch and learns. If you have an idea for a future lunch and learn, then please let us know. But we want to give a big shout out today to our sponsors. The Oklahoma Department of Environmental Quality does give Okra quite a bit of funding to enable all of the recycling, outreach, education, and networking opportunities that Okra provides. And of course, Natural Evolution, who is today's speaker. And let me welcome Tracy Phillips. She's president and CEO of Natural Evolution in the Tulsa metro area. And Tracy has been a long time recycling advocate. She's a former Okra president and board member. And so we are thrilled to have Tracy with us today to share her expertise and knowledge on everything e-waste. So I will turn it over to Tracy.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to be here this afternoon and in the interest in recycling electronics and learning more about the challenges and solutions and the industry itself. So, got a couple of short but informative videos that we'll start with, and then I think it's Q&A after that. So, each video is about 10 minutes or less, so we'll start there.
Waste problem, y'all. Look at this. You got a old laptop, a coffee maker, a flamingo lamp. Oh Lord, curling iron.
I'm sorry.
I wasn't seeing any picture. Was everybody else seeing the picture?
Nope.
No, just the
So
audio.
let's try again.
Okay. Do you see that?
Now I can see it. Okay.
Okay.
But I don't have any sound.
You got a old laptop, a coffee maker, a flamingo lamp. Oh Lord, curling iron. What's going on here?
Oh, that's a phone I dropped in the toilet.
Okay. Did you try to get it fixed?
I just got a new one.
Of course you did. You see, that right there is what I'm talking about. Just in 2019 alone, Americans generated about 7 million tons of e-waste. That's about 46 pounds per person. So today we're exploring what actually happens to all our e-waste. Now, when I say e-waste, I'm talking anything with a plug or battery. According to one estimate, about half of all e-waste is personal devices that we just can't live without. Computers, smartphones, tablets, TVs, and small equipment like, coffee makers. And to clarify, this e-waste problem isn't just a US problem. It's a global issue. Between 2010 and 2019, global e-waste went from 33.8 million metric tons to 53.6 million metric tons. That's almost the equivalent of 4,500 Eiffel Towers. I'm talking, if you put those all in one space, that'd cover the area the size of Manhattan. And the US and Europe contribute to almost half of the e-waste generated each year. Honestly, it's not all that surprising. Y'all, we go crazy for new tech. Apple came out with the first iPhone in 2007, sold over 1 million of them in the first 3 months, and then they just kept releasing different versions every year. And other tech companies got in on that action. Now, the average American gets a new phone every 18 months, which means about 100 to 120 million phones are tossed each year. But don't go thinking it's just a consumer problem. Companies also purposely design products to not last as long or to be harder to repair. So you're forced to buy stuff instead of, fixing the broken thing. There's actually a term for this. It's called planned obsolescence. And there's several ways companies use legit tricky tactics to do this, like having copyrighted software of digital locks so third parties can't fix stuff. Like Apple was infamous for doing this back in 2016 when it just straight up bricked people's phones if it had detected that it was repaired by an unauthorized repair tech. People freaked out and Apple eventually apologized and released a fix. Another thing companies will do is they'll pair different parts together so that if something breaks, you simply can't just replace one part. All kinds of companies do this. I'm talking tractors, TVs, video game consoles, food processors, cars, you name it. And then companies will also straight up refuse to sell replacement parts or operating manuals to fix things. Or they'll just glue parts together instead of using screws, which makes it harder to take apart and repair. And to make matters worse, a lot of this stuff is toxic. I'm talking things like lead and mercury in circuit boards and brominated flame retardants in the plastics. So where does this all go? Well, if it's not being stored in a closet or tossed in a landfill, it can actually end up being shipped around the world. Check out this map that shows how rich countries end up dumping e-waste at these sites in developing countries like this one in Ghana. See that smoke? Yeah, that's real toxic.
We would see people burning the stuff, breathing in the toxic fumes, using really caustic acids to strip out precious metals and discard the rest by just dumping it into the rivers.
That's Jim Puckett. His organization monitors the global trade of waste, including e-waste.
For one place in Thailand, we call it the dioxin factory, because when you burn computer plastics, it's got all this bromine in it and chlorine in it. And you burn that, you make dioxin, which is one of the most toxic substances. And this is what this place did. It basically just burned circuit boards day in and day out. And it was in an agricultural region. So all the fallout would go into the dairy farms and the other agricultural crops. And people would be then eating that, putting in these toxins into the food chain.
And chlorinated dioxins are as scary as they sound. They can cause reproductive and developmental problems, damage the immune system, interfere with hormones, and also cause cancer. Now, this isn't supposed to happen. Back in 1989, the UN created an international treaty which regulates the trade of toxic waste. There are 190 parties to it, but the US never actually ratified it. And despite its existence, as you can see, this trade is still happening. And Jim's been working to stop it for a long time. At first, he was doing it like the old school stakeout way, where he'd watch e-waste being loaded into cargo containers on ships, and then he'd track those containers online through the shipping companies.
We would alert the authorities in the receiving country, hey, we got some electronic waste coming towards you. It's illegal for your country to import that. You might want to take this off the ship and search it.
And then about 15 years ago, they started using GPS trackers.
We would put it inside old computers, inside monitors, inside printers, embed those trackers in the thing, make the thing totally dysfunctional so nobody could reuse it.
And then they bring it to an e-waste recycler and track where it goes.
We were able to show that so much of this stuff, more than 20%, was still going offshore. And moreover, we were able to go right to the places it was ending up. So we found about more than 20 so-called recyclers in Hong Kong, and working with the Hong Kong press and the US press, we were able to shut those operations down.
Jim says now a lot of that business has moved to other parts of the world in places like Southeast Asia.
And this is happening still to this day, all over Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia.
But the good news is, over time, Jim's seen the rate of export from the US decrease from about 80% to 20%. Not every e-waste recycler is shipping their stuff overseas.
We had to create a market strategy, a certification, so that we could direct consumers and businesses to use only the good recyclers that pledge not to export, and we check them. And this is the e-Stewards certified recyclers. And we also put GPS trackers into their stream and make sure that they're not lying to us.
And these types of responsible recyclers are a part of the solution to this massive e-waste problem.
Last month, we took in 15 million pounds of electronic waste at our 9 facilities across the United States.
ERI is an e-Steward certified recycler and the largest recycler of electronic waste in the US. They have the capacity to recycle more than 1 billion pounds of electronic devices annually.
We commoditized a lot of those electronics, which means we put it through our proprietary shredders and turned it into commodities: steel, plastic, aluminum, copper, gold, lead, silver. And all those metals and the plastics were sold to smelters to go back into new products around.
A circular economy is pretty much the opposite of designing things for the dump. It's a more sustainable vision where instead of extracting raw materials from the earth, making something with it, and then throwing that thing away when you're done, you instead reuse and repurpose materials so you're not extracting so much from the planet and creating so much waste.
Think about all the carbon emissions that you save, that we don't have to go dig for new aluminum because we can recycle old aluminum. Same thing goes for gold and silver and lead and all these other metals, steel. We can save so much energy, which saves so much carbon emissions when we recycle these materials.
When e-waste is just tossed or not handled properly, we're throwing out a lot of valuable stuff. According to a World Economic Forum report, the material value alone is worth $62.5 billion, 3 times more than the annual output of the world's silver mines, and more than the GDP of most countries. There's 100 times more gold in a ton of mobile phones than in a ton of gold ore. That's a lot of gold. So making sure your stuff ends up at an eStewards recycler is one thing you can do, but solving this global e-waste problem is going to require multiple solutions. And a lot of it comes down to the design of the product.
They need to be designed, first of all, to be toxic free. They need to be designed in a way that longevity is expected. And one way to do that is to have, rather than owning your computer, to lease it. And if you lease it from the company that makes it, they have an incentive to have it last a really long time. They have an incentive not to make it toxic because they're going to get that product. It's theirs. They're just leasing it to you.
This business model of electronics as a service could potentially make it so that companies are the ones responsible for the waste they generate rather than leaving it to the hands of the consumers. Come on, tech bros. Let's step up your game. Let's see if you can design the toxic stuff out of it. I'm not a venture capitalist, but I am cute. But in the meantime, what can you do? Maybe see if you can hold on to your stuff a little longer before buying something new, or buy a refurbished phone or computer. And if you're like us and you do have a pile of e-waste sitting in a box in your closet, take those things to an e-waste recycler. Check out that eStewards website to find one near you. And pro tip, Staples e-waste collection sites all use eStewards certified recyclers. Hey Staples, hit me up for a sponsorship. I think we could do some things. So, what do you all think? Has watching this video changed the way you think about e-waste? Let us know in the comments below. And for students in school, Jim says you should find out what they do with their old Chromebooks and tech.
It's really worthwhile for people from the grassroots to say, I want to know where our school computers end up. Whoever's going to give them the best deal on recycling will often be who the schools use, and those are often the worst. So they are cutting corners to make the bids they make, and very often those corners that get cut are dumping things in developing countries. If you want to use some trackers, contact us, because we might be able to spare some of our trackers, and you can put GPS trackers into things and put them into your school recycle program and see what happens.
And speaking of things good for the environment, all this month, PBS is celebrating Earth Month. Be sure to check out 2 Senses episode on fast fashion and how our obsession with new clothing has both a financial and environmental impact. Check out the link in the description for it and for the rest of PBS's Earth Month playlist. As always, I'm your host, Miles Best. Peace out.
Okay. There's the first one. And here's the second one. I will follow up on some of those.
Where they'd store it right under our noses. And they just thought they could get away with it forever. And they could have if it hadn't been for those trackers.
Right now, you're watching this on an electronic device. Do you ever think about where it'll end up when you're done with it? Many devices contain toxic materials and should be recycled very carefully. Sadly, lots end up in landfills. But even if you're diligent and give your electronic waste, or e-waste, to a recycler, that's no guarantee about what happens next. American recyclers often ship it overseas, frequently to countries in Southern Asia. There, workers take apart toxic material by hand, often without proper safety measures. And US policy lets it happen. But, thanks to one small nonprofit, not everyone gets away with it.
That means they're really worried about our program, probably.
So we usually want to put our tracker somewhere where it will be nice to fit in. So, for example, right here is a good spot.
Nope.
Now, how do you know
done by you. It's what is it that has to be done as a puzzle and song.
Check out my home scrambling into T-Mobile to get the new iPhone 16 Pro built for Apple Intelligence. Cuz holding it up like a baby lion. Now at T-Mobile.com, get the new iPhone 16 Pro.
The commercials are a bonus. We're not going to charge you
can
for
save
them.
20% every month.
No, just the fact that we're watching a commercial for a new phone.
We're at the office of the
Oh,
Basel
right.
Action Network, or BAN, a nonprofit group that's dedicated to following the e-waste trade around the world. BAN installs secret GPS trackers and electronics and then drops them off at recyclers to see where they end up. Jim Puckett is the founder and director of BAN.
In the late 1980s, way back when, there was a rash, an epidemic of people exporting their hazardous waste to developing countries rather than properly managing it at home, because it was difficult, poisonous stuff, right? So people said, well, we'll just use the ships out there and free trade and go ahead and export it.
Americans throw out millions of tons of electronics every year, and export abroad is still a big problem. Take, for instance, LCD monitors that contain mercury. If a worker in, say, Hong Kong smashes it, poisonous vapor can be released into the air. Workers dismantling electronics can get severely sick and even die. A 1989 treaty called the Basel Convention does regulate the export of e-waste, but the US has never ratified it, and a provision that would stop countries from sending e-waste to many developing nations isn't in effect.
The U.S. has been remiss for many years now, for about 20-some years, particularly environmental treaties.
So there's very little stopping American recyclers from dumping their electronics abroad, until BAN gets involved.
And so the tracker will go here. This board will end up going right about there. So it still looks like a normal piece of electronic.
Without federal e-waste laws, BAN's tracking system is one of the only ways for businesses and governments to find out who they want to work with. After we bugged this monitor, we made plans to drop it at a local recycler.
This is the loading dock where you will be walking up to and delivering it.
What do you say when you walk up to the counter?
We have something to deliver for you guys. Here's an old monitor, just like act like a customer, and that's it.
This recycler, which we're not naming, has been caught exporting waste in the past, and BAN wants to check up on them.
Yeah, it's dropping it off for recycling.
Yeah, would you like a receipt?
Yes, please.
Do that via email right up here.
Okay. It's that easy.
That was incredibly easy.
Yeah.
What email address did you put in?
It's my personal email address.
Okay.
Not my work email address.
I was gonna say. Afterwards, BAN sent me up with their in-house software called EarthEye, so I could follow the monitor's trail. As we were working on this video, I could see it had traveled miles outside of Seattle to an e-waste processing facility. Using EarthEye, BAN has tracked the spread of e-waste all over the planet.
We have two trackers here, one that ended up in Hong Kong and one that ended up in Thailand. As we zoom in, it just looks like a farmland. Keep zooming in, and you see all this trash right here. This black part is, I believe, from the sludge from actually burning and handling this material.
Again, exporting electronics is not against the law in the US, but with the help of investigators, BAN has still managed to send some unethical recyclers to prison.
Wow, the Total Reclaim story goes way back.
In 2002, BAN produced a documentary about e-waste exported to China, and they interviewed recyclers about their practices.
And the only one that would talk to us was Craig Lorch of Total Reclaim. And we put him in our film as being a good guy that was concerned about the export, that he still had to do some exporting, but he didn't like to do it.
The local Seattle recycler, Total Reclaim, eventually signed on to BAN's certification program, meaning they pledged to recycle ethically.
So he became, over the years, our poster child of the good recycler.
Lorch even appeared in the BAN documentary complaining about unprincipled recyclers.
You're charging on the front side, you're selling the material on the back side offshore. You don't do any work in between. You just arrange to have the material loaded into a shipping container and shipped. It's all about the money.
But in 2015, while working on a tracking report, BAN noticed waste flowing from Oregon to Total Reclaim in Washington. It made its way to Seattle's industrial Harbor Island, only about 3 miles from BAN's office.
We're just really so close. It's amazing.
Then, the tracker crossed the Pacific to Hong Kong.
And we were shocked. We were just like, whoa, these things do not lie. what's going on with Total Reclaim, our poster child of the good guys.
Band's report drew the attention of state and federal investigators. As Assistant U.S. Attorney Seth Wilkinson explains, Total Reclaim broke the law by lying to their customers.
In this case, we don't have a federal law that specifically prohibits sending things overseas, sending this material overseas. What we do have is federal laws that makes it illegal to commit fraud, to make material misrepresentations about something in order to get money.
And the more digging investigators did, the more fabrications that turned up.
Total Reclaim initially said, oh, there must be some mistake. We don't send flat screen monitors to Asia. And they said, what we do is we send plastic to Asia. And they said what must have happened is that one of the GPS devices must have fallen out of a monitor, fallen into a bin of plastic, and been transported over to Asia. And to back that false narrative up, they created a bunch of false documents.
Puckett traveled to Hong Kong, where he found Total Reclaim's discarded LCD monitors and workers who could have been poisoned by them. Eventually, Total Reclaim fessed up, and the founders were ultimately charged with fraud.
The defendants are charged with one count of conspiracy in violation of Title 18 United States Code, Section 371.
The founders agreed to a plea deal and were each sentenced to 28 months in prison. So Band's system worked, although for Puckett, it hardly felt like a relief.
It's probably one of the most troubling things I've experienced in this business of being an advocate, was getting a real ally and then find out that you're betrayed by that ally.
I'm going to take just 1 minute to explain why your contribution right now is so important. This may not be the news you want to hear, but it is the truth.
Just mute it, Tracy.
There we go.
It can be hard to picture just how much of this stuff recyclers have to deal with. So we visited a local business called Friendly Earth, which says it's trying to handle the work responsibly, like Total Reclaim was supposed to.
This is what it looks like when you first get it.
This is
it looks like a mess.
A pretty good example of it. You're going to see a mix of, loose circuit boards, plenty of wire, plenty of cabling, maybe a desktop or two. This one looks like it's seen better days.
The company takes in thousands of pounds of electronics a day from around Washington. It refurbishes what it can and sends the rest to other companies to be broken down further.
We are small in comparison to a lot of the recyclers out there that have shredders or fleet of 20 to 30 trucks, or maybe 7 to 10, 12, 15 locations across the world. We're growing, but we're growing organically, and we're doing it, the right way.
For a lot of Americans, the effects of e-waste can seem so far away that they're hard to grasp. But the way our electronics are recycled matters. Federal legislation to reform e-waste exporting has been on the table for years, but keeps slipping away. Meanwhile, the damage that's happening is real.
Pollution, it does harm people. Nobody quantifies it, and it's really hard to quantify how many deaths or disease. But it is a form of murder. When people die from this, and they'll die prematurely, the data supports the fact that these pollutants do cause death and disease.
By contrast, proper recycling is more expensive, but it is doable. So, by the numbers, none of this really had to happen.
Each of the owners of Total Reclaim took home almost $8 million in income over the period that this was going on. It would have cost about $2.5 million for them to do this properly. So perhaps instead of each of them making 8, they would have made $6.5 million each.
So I share all of that. We actually been participated in the Eastridge program since 2011, before there was actually a certification. And I show all of that. And I knew Craig actually at Total Reclaim. And I think it really exhibits the challenges. And the growth in the industry. eStorage actually came up with the GPS tracking system as well as the surprise audits, and they actively use both because this is such a difficult industry, and we in turn do the same with our downstreams because and we don't change very often, so we're very consistent with our partners and our downstream partners for the reasons that were exhibited, because it's a difficult industry, and it's expensive to keep track of what's going on and where. And so anyway, I'll open it up for Sarah and questions. And
Yeah, so this formed into an actual open forum. So if you have any questions, you're welcome to unmute or type them in the chat, and Tracy will be answering as to the best of her ability.
We got the EPA Swiffer grant last year. We got awarded that to build a recycling center. So we're going to be opening a recycling center here on the Tribal Complex campus. And we've been asked a lot about our e-waste and what we can do and how we can collect it to get rid of it. And I'm fairly new to environmental side, so that's where I have a question is like, if we decide to collect e-waste, is there certain things that we have to do and who we can contact to get, like, to do a pickup or something?
yes, so and I'm happy to have a more detailed conversation with you on offline, but there are practices of collection and storage and management of it, and then using a certified recycler. So we're at eStorage. There's an R2 certification as well, which that certification has gotten better over the years. I will say the only difference is they do not have GPS tracking within their certification. It's not part of, nor do they have the surprise audits, but it's still a good certification that's available. So, but there's a lot to it. The collection and space required of and management of e-waste.
All right, we just had a question come in the chat. So it says, any standards on the design to recycle for general electronic devices? Do you guys work on making such standards?
No. That's the very short. I mean, there's EP, and so that the energy usage of electronics, but as far as a standard of making it more recyclable, no.
So EPR product, I can't believe that was environmental product responsibility. Help me out, Libby. Anyway, Product Stewardship Institute works with helping promote packaging items so that they can be recycled and they're not just throw away. And if you want any more information about maybe what's happening in the United States, I would go to the Product Stewardship Institute website and see what they have. Extended producer responsibility. I knew I would get it. EPR. You'll hear that thrown out a lot. We do not have any EPRs laws in Oklahoma. There are very few states that are, but That's the concept that the manufacturer has to be responsible for proper disposal.
Right. But still there's not any national or international laws. There's the EU is trying to push some things as far as requirements, for manufacturing. There's RoHS compliance that I forget what year that was enacted, but of not putting lead on the circuit boards. And so there is some of that, but that's about the extent.
We actually have one EPR law. It's the Oklahoma Computers Recycling Act, OCERA. So that is one that we have, and companies that sell computers to individuals, not companies, have to provide recycling. So those are usually mailed back. So that is one that we have.
Tracy, is that film that we just saw part of a larger, for a film of a larger format that could be as a program?
There's those two are just two short films. There is one film that was done several years ago that is about 45 minutes. And it's a little bit older film, but the data is still pretty relevant. But it's a good 45 minutes to 55, something like that. So
are you going to make available in the notes the name of it and how we might be able to get in touch with it, how we can get it?
I can put the links for the two films in the chats. Yep. And so everybody has that available.
That'd be great. Thank
sure.
you.
When we put this recording of this Lunch and Learn on the Oprah website, we can also include those links. And Tracy, if you want to send us the additional one, the longer one that you were just speaking of, we can include that as well, Kathy.
Great, thank you.
Yes.
And I can put a copy of the latest OCERA report. I've even read it and I forgot about it.
So Tracy, I have a question. I know the first video that you showed talked about some of the materials that are recovered, steel, gold, silver. What are some of the other materials that are recovered from our electronic devices that are either extremely valuable or very rare, those types of things?
Aluminum is certainly recovered, and then copper is kind of the primary things. I mean, your ferrous, steel is, and then there's some palladium that's recovered, and really the primaries are gold, silver, and palladium. There's, depending on, that's the most general recovered. Some of the other metals that are in there are very minuscule. And so when you get to the refining process, they're not always recovered just because of temperature and melting points and that kind of thing. So, but those are the primary metals, like the mercury and some of that, when they're handled in the ways that were shown in the video, they cause more problems, but through the recycling process, they're able to recover not recover, but handle it properly. So there's no disposal in places that it shouldn't be. Same with the lead. So.
Great. Okay, we have another one in the chat. How much of the waste is from complex devices like phones and laptops as compared to simple devices like water or room heater, toasters? Is there categorization?
It's a good question, and from our experience, it's closer to 90%, 95% complex devices.
Okay. So why I asked that question is
because the way to recycle a phone is completely different than recycling a simple device like a toaster or something.
Sure.
So yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
That way.
Yes. So
Because the videos you showed had all kind of electronic devices, not just phones and all that. So
yeah.
that's
Yeah. And the challenges and the risks, right, on the simple devices are a lot different than, on the more complex devices. So they're not the same beast, if you will. But it's a lot more, and with the crossover of more devices becoming smart, even toasters, I mean, and coffee makers, and the worlds are merging at a very rapid pace, where there's a lot of crossover that we're seeing.
Yeah,
Wi-Fi.
have you had the refrigerators with TVs in the doors come into you yet?
We have not yet. We actually don't accept refrigerators, but it's something that we don't remove coolants here, but we get enough calls that and the merging of the two worlds is happening, that I keep looking at that, just because there's so much crossover.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So when you guys accept the electronic waste, is there a sorting facility after that, or?
We have a sorting facility here.
So like before it goes to the shredder, is there a sorting facility which separates out these kind of different devices, or?
Sure. Yes.
And is there a standard for that?
It depends on which certification that you operate under. So under and the shredding facility. So under e-stewards, we have air monitoring controls and particular requirements. So depending on it depends on what you're shredding, because different things that you shred have different lead or mercury content, and so that all has to be monitored. And so depending on where you're going and how that's shredded, then that is monitored and sorted, depending on what your shred facility looks like. So
good, thank you.
Okay, there's some more stuff in the comments. So Travis said, it seems to be a vicious cycle of mining these precious resources, turning them into products, and then throwing them away. Unfortunately, as a society, I think we would all agree that it is a throwaway society, and recycling isn't made convenient, then it doesn't happen. So what is preventing state or federal programs from setting up drop-off stations in our communities? I believe that they would be overwhelmed with products that could be recoverable and profitable.
This might be a good time for Eric to talk about what the Okra Advocacy Committee is trying to do. Totally putting Eric on the spot.
Sure. So as Tracy's been illustrating, there's clearly challenges with e-waste, and I think our advocacy working group's been talking through this issue a lot, and unfortunately, we are seeing incidents almost on a monthly, if not more, basis of fire incidents occurring in our communities. So we've had a truck fire where someone threw some sort of battery into their recycling in the city of Norman. I know something similar has happened, and luckily one of Jerry's drivers in the city of Broken Arrow was able to prevent a larger scale of fire, but a battery ignited in the back of one of their trash trucks. I think just last week, a waste management facility in Oklahoma City had a large scale fire that could have been a lot worse than it was without some efforts within by one of their employees, and that employee, I think, put themselves at great risk in trying to prevent it from getting a lot worse. So it's a safety issue, not just in the ways that those videos illustrated, but within our own communities. And so it's contingent upon all of us on this call and the work of OKRA to find ways to prevent e-waste batteries from getting in places they shouldn't be. So that's why the work of Tracy is so critical, and other recyclers in our communities, and OKRA partners that are having e-waste drop-off events and other things like that. So the work of the education committee within OKRA is critical in the work today. So we wanted to illustrate this issue with our state legislature and highlight some of the challenges and opportunities that come with e-waste and battery recycling. So back on October 2nd, there was an interim study hosted by Representative Trish Ranson of Stillwater. Tracy, Jerry, and two other speakers kind of outlined the opportunities and challenges of e-waste in Oklahoma, potential solutions. Libby mentioned OCERA, the state law for our current sort of e-waste recycling program, and we're now exploring ways potentially to look at that, whether that's an update to that existing law, but also just to highlight with legislators that there are issues with e-waste and battery recycling in our communities. The other thing I would highlight is, and I think Tracy has mentioned this a little bit, but there's a number of companies that have come to Oklahoma or grown in Oklahoma to sort of meet the circular economy when it comes to minerals and other things that make up the electronic devices we use. So whether that's Blue Whale in Bartlesville or Green Lion in Atoka, I'm missing a bunch, I know, but so I would encourage folks to look at what the Department of Commerce and some of the things that we're doing as a state to try to get into this business. I think Tracy can maybe get into this a little bit more, but there's a huge economic opportunity with closing the loop on this waste stream and doing more recycling and more materials recovery. So that's what we should be hopeful about. But we all, I think, are tasked with trying to find ways to keep citizens safe, keep e-waste out of waste streams that it shouldn't be in, provide more opportunities for recycling drop-off and more education.
Thank you, Eric. And if there's anybody on the call that would like to be involved in OKRA's advocacy work, you can reach out to Ellen or to Eric and they'll get you involved. Tracy, do you want to add anything to what Eric just said?
I think that those are all good points, and we do have the opportunity within the state to be supporting our current businesses and the companies that are building out their infrastructure here. And it is, for me, I think we as citizens of the state have opportunities to see and choose how we want to move forward. This is a waste stream that's not going away. It's not diminishing, and it's really only getting more complex and evolving at a faster rate. And so we can either ignore those facts and just then whatever happens, or we can be proactive in our approach and look at how we manage things and how we want them managed. And how we want them managed has to do with how we're going to support the infrastructure that we're creating, both on the collection piece and then also the manufacturing piece. I've I personally think of as like reverse manufacturing. So, it's manufacturing in reverse. And so, you can say recycling, but it's just true. But it's also how are we creating materials that can be reused and create more of a circular economy within our state. So we can either, make sure that we're building safe and stable and secure infrastructure, or we can sort of leave it up to the wild, wild west and whatever happens, happens. And that don't always work out so good. But we have we have a choice in that. And sort of it's now's the time to be looking at that. And it's going to develop and it's going to happen. It's just really a question of what do we want to make sure that we have enough controls in place to make sure that people and the citizens in our environment stay safe or not.
Okay, there's some more stuff in the chat. I know we have lots of communities in Oklahoma that do e-waste events or accept e-waste as an ongoing program. But for communities that don't have a program or lack access, what would be the process for establishing a program in those communities?
So it really has, starting with collection events is kind of a good way to do that. One-day events, and to start bringing awareness and education to that. And instead of trying to just jump out there and do it full time, unless you've got the funds to do that, then really trying to do, a collection event and just start and build from there. Most of the communities that we've worked with over the years in multiple states have started with the collection events, and over time, as awareness and education in the community has built, they've moved to a full-time collection. So it's been more of a gradual process, and that can be a couple of times a year, 4 times a year, once a year. It really just depends on the facility and funding that is there. Unfortunately, when we get into the rural areas, it's expensive, and there's no way around that. And that's really the challenges when there's areas that can collaborate and work together. So maybe some of the smaller communities are, having events at the same time or close to it, and they can share or, piggyback off each other. Then I think that helps with some of that process, but and some of the costs can be reduced a little bit. But it's, unfortunately, when you start moving people and equipment and everything, the cost is the cost, whether you collect, several thousands pounds or, 20,000 pounds or 5. So it's, there's a certain amount of cost to that. So there's multiple ways to start. It really just depends on the entity that is starting that and sort of their capacity and space and internal infrastructure that they might have. So I know that's kind of a roundabout way to answer that question, but it's just there's not a one specific. I've seen it done all sorts of different ways. So it really just depends on what that community has and the people that are committed behind that, and the infrastructure that they have and that capacity, both people and space and equipment. So
absolutely. And there have been lots of cities and organizations within Okra that have done these one-time collections. So if there's anyone here today that is interested in getting something started, you can reach out to Ellen and she can try to put you in contact with someone that could maybe help walk you through the steps, whether that's Tracy or one of our other Okra members.
In the chat, Libby's put about the grant program that the DEQ has to help communities to fund special waste collections. And then Jerry, I'm going to put you on the spot. I believe you have one coming up on Saturday. Can you tell us a little
Nope.
about it?
Already had it.
Oh, it was last Saturday.
It was last Saturday. It was the 19th.
Sorry.
Well, tell us what you already did, Jerry.
We filled a trailer full of this stuff, which is normal. I mean, we tend to fill a trailer full of this every time, and we've been doing this now for, well, 3 years, and we do it twice a year, and we never are short e-waste. It is a constant. I mean, we take all the hard to recycle items, you know, sharps and medications and tires, and we try to get this stuff out of the waste stream. It'll either end up at the landfill or in our waterways. So either way is not going to work for us. So that's what we do. And for the e-waste, we end up with a trailer full every time. I don't have the final counts. We ended up with 297 cars that came through, and we had moved our location. So we expected it to be not very well attended, but it ended up almost 300 cars is pretty well attended for moving the location. We went inland into the center of town because the facility we used to use was the events park, and they're building a new amphitheater out there. So it's all kind of closed off to us. But by moving it into town, in the center of town, I think we actually perked up a lot of people, and our fall one is always less than our spring one. Spring is going to be insane, but e-waste is always a huge part of it, and I don't see it getting any better anytime soon. I think Tracy's probably cornered the market on the greatest thing in the world as far as business model. It's not going to go away.
Yeah.
And I knew John
Sheridan. Yeah. Yeah.
Because one of his first offices was in Fresno, and that facility is gigantic, and it's never empty. It's just never. I mean, it's a constant. So
I'll also say behind that, that's the difference of one, population, right?
Yeah.
Population, but also state programs.
Yeah, there's a lot of funding at the state level for it, and it's we have a lot of in California. We had a lot of laws that have provided prohibitions for putting certain things in the waste stream. So
and I'm not advocating one way or the other, but I'm just pointing out that every large facility would not be possible like that for consumer without state program commitments that drive that volume.
It's funny that there wasn't an element of the Swiffer grant that covered only e-waste. Since there's such a push at the federal level to push everything towards electrification for vehicles and all of that, you would think that the Swiffer grant would have its own element that was called out was just electronic waste recycling. But
it was. I agree with you. There's the funding on the battery recycling side. There's a lot of movement, for that, but there's a void on that collection piece and that processing in between piece. But
well, my personal, thank you, Jerry, personal experience, I've been to the City of Bixby's collection event the past 2 years, and they fill the trailers and they can't take any more. And Bixby is a part of the Metropolitan Environmental Trust, which is in the Tulsa County area, and the cities pay apportionments to the Met, and all of us can have 1 to 2 special waste collection events a year. Plus, a lot of the Met recycling depots will also take e-waste. And even with that accessibility, there is always e-waste coming in. But I think one of the keys that is hard to talk about that I have to talk about to my friends and neighbors is that it costs money to properly dispose of e-waste, and it costs to recycle e-waste. And that's just kind of the bottom line. And I also have to add that the Department of Environmental Quality has a guide if you want to have a special events, special waste event. And email me at info@okrecycles.org, and I can hook you up with someone who successfully collects, hopefully in your part of the state.
Yes. Libby, do you want to hop on it all and talk about the guide that was created for the grant funding? And those links to both things are in the chat if anyone is interested in those.
Yeah, our grants open December 1st. They're reimbursement grants, just something to keep in mind. But we will cover electronics recycling. We really like to fund events that cover more than just electronics, catching that household hazardous waste, medical sharps, pharmaceuticals. So the more you can add, the better in our eyes. And that collection event guide is sort of a guide for those larger collection events, though you could use it to just host an electronics event. So, but if you have any questions or need anything, please feel free to contact me on our webpage. My phone number is on there. Thank you.
Thanks, Libby. Let's see, making sure I didn't miss anything else in the chat. Ginger has talked about educating the public for sure. I think we all recognize that there's still a gap in what people don't realize about their electronics. And Tracy, that made me think that if you're getting more of the complex stuff, is that the stuff that we've been ingrained to say, oh, recycle that telephone, recycle that computer, but maybe not get the message with the toaster or the more basic items.
There could be some of that. I think that people don't always know. You know, we get a lot of questions every day of what can be recycled, what can't, and so people don't always think of the smaller appliances, you know, that can be recycled. And so, you know, there's opportunities for messaging of some of that, and people are pleasantly surprised, you know, when we can take those things, you know, the hair dryers, the curling irons, you know, all of that stuff that burn up pretty quickly.
They can.
You know, nothing. I don't think that there's anything that lasts, you know, like it used to.
No.
Yeah, it's just, it is definitely planned obsolescence. So, but yeah, there's definitely education opportunities for, you know, communicating that a lot of those devices can be recycled. I think the challenge is that there's so much that can be recycled in that world that it's really hard to list it out and get that specific.
I have a small question on that note, if I may.
Sure.
Like when you collect the e-waste at the initial stage, do you actually see that how much of that is actually repairable and can be directly sold as a refurbished product? Or it directly goes to the shredders and for recycling?
I'm not sure that I understand.
Does any of the stuff that comes to you get repaired, or does all of it get shredded and transformed into?
Yeah, so we do have a resale side. It's a very small, it actually works out to less than 1% of our stream weight wise. So just for a host of reasons. But we also, under the Eastward standard, which is we operate at closer to 10 times scrap value. Under the standard, it's a 3 times scrap value. requirement. So we actually have to prove anything that is resold has to meet a 3 times scrap value. And it's something that our auditors actually audit us on a annual basis. So that's can get pretty complex, pretty quick.
Yeah.
Why I asked that question is, so if there is a big dump where you are putting all kind of electronic waste, so even if something is like degraded only 10% and can just be reused or resold, that will also get broken during that collection process itself.
Oh, yeah, there's way too much volume.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Makes sense. Well, we have reached the hour. In fact, we're a minute over. So I want to thank everybody for attending today. I hope you learned something. And Tracy, as always, your information was absolutely invaluable. If you have further questions, again, Okra is happy to put you in connection with either Tracy or someone else within the Okra network that can help you in any e-waste endeavors that you might have going on. I just want to pop some slides back up here really quickly and say again, thank you both to Tracy and Natural Evolution for being a sponsor today, as well as DEQ for your sponsorship of Okra's Lunch and Learn series. And join us for our next Lunch and Learn, which is coming up on Friday, November 15th, which is, if you don't know, America Recycles Day. So we will be talking about what happens after the bin. So talking about landfills and trash and maybe some new destinations for that stuff. So join us that day. And if you are not already a member of Okra, we would love to have you join. So this is the membership form. You can also go to the Okra website and join as a member. And Ellen, is there anything else that you would like to add today?
No, just thank everybody for coming.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Hope to see you on November 15th.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you. Have a good day.